Welcome back. You're here because you want answers. This is about the truth behind the Great War, about who really pressed the button that ended the world. For 200 years, we've blamed China. We've told ourselves it was war, politics, the inevitable march of nations toward mutual destruction. We've accepted that story because it made sense, because it fit the narrative, because questioning it felt like conspiracy theory madness. But what if the real conspiracy was making us believe the lie? What if the truth was so much worse than enemy nations at war? What if the people who promised to save humanity were the ones who murdered it? This video will prove, with timeline evidence and corporate documents and patterns that cannot be denied, that Vault-Tec Corporation dropped the first nuclear bombs in 2077. Not for ideology, not for territory, for money, for control, for a business model that only worked if civilization burned. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. The evidence is overwhelming, the pattern is undeniable, and the corporation responsible is still out there, still in control, still dropping bombs when their power is threatened. This is the confession of someone who found the proof, someone who paid the price for knowing, someone who's running out of time to warn you before the feral madness takes over completely. So settle in. This is going to be a long testimony, and by the end, you'll understand exactly what happened on October 23rd, 2077. You'll know who destroyed the world, and you'll know why they're still the most dangerous threat in the wasteland. Let's talk about the day Vault-Tec ended everything. I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything you thought you knew about the day the world ended. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I saw, what I found, and what I can prove. I used to work in the archives at Vault-Tec Tower, back when there was still a Vault-Tec Tower. Back when there was still a world. I was nobody important, just another data analyst sorting through financial records and corporate minutes. But being nobody important meant nobody watched me too closely, and that meant I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. The Great War happened on October 23, 2077. Everyone knows that date. It's burned into history like a brand on flesh. 9:47 in the morning, Eastern Time. The missiles started falling, and within 4 hours, the world was ash and fire and screaming. We were told it was China. Always China. The enemy across the ocean. The communists who wanted to destroy American freedom. That's what they taught in the schools. What they said on the holotapes. What every survivor who crawled out of the rubble believed for over 200 years. They lied. China didn't start the Great War. Oh, China launched missiles that day. That much is true. But they didn't launch first. Someone else pressed that button. Someone who wore an American flag on their lapel and a Vault-Tec ID badge around their neck. Someone who looked at the balance sheets and profit margins and decided that 7 billion human lives were an acceptable cost of doing business. I found the proof 6 months before I died, or maybe before I stopped being human. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. The radiation took my skin, my hair, everything that made me look like the person I used to be. But it couldn't take my memory, and it couldn't take the documents I'd hidden away in a lead-lined case deep in the sublevels. I'm telling you this now because I'm running out of time. The feral madness is coming. I can feel it creeping in at the edges of my mind like frost on a window. Soon I'll be nothing but hunger and rage, another shambling ghoul in the wasteland. But before that happens, before I lose the ability to form words and thoughts and testimony, I need someone to know the truth. Vault-Tec dropped the bombs. Not China. Not some rogue military commander. Not aliens or sabotage or miscommunication. It was Vault-Tec, the company that promised to save humanity, that deliberately ended the world. And I can prove it. Let me take you back to a meeting that happened on September 15th, 2077, just over a month before the bombs fell. This wasn't some low-level planning session. This was the executives, the people at the very top of the pyramid. Barbara Howard chaired the meeting. You might not know her name, but you'd recognize her husband. Cooper Howard, the movie star, the face of Vault-Tec advertising, the original Vault Boy. Cooper thought he was selling safety. He thought he was giving people hope. He had no idea his own wife was architecting genocide. The meeting took place in Conference Room 7 on the 52nd floor of Vault-Tec Tower. I know because I processed the expense reports afterward. 14,000 caps for catering, 17 guests, each representing a different corporation. Robert House from Robco Industries, Frederick Sinclair from the Sierra Madre, Leon von Felden from West Tech, Julia Masters from Big MT, representatives from Poseidon Energy, Red Rocket, Mass Fusion, every major player in pre-war America, all gathered in one room. And Bud Askins, of course. Bud Askins, who had survived the war as a brain in a jar, watching over his frozen executives like a shepherd tending corpses. The meeting minutes survived. Most of them were destroyed, of course. Vault-Tec was very thorough about erasing evidence, but they didn't know about the backup servers in Sublevel 9, the ones that weren't connected to the main network, the ones that caught everything, archived everything, remembered everything. I found those servers. I read those files. And what I read made me understand why the ghouls scream. Barbara Howard opened the meeting with a simple question. How do you guarantee return on investment when your product only has value if civilization collapses? Vault-Tec had sold over 80,000 vault spaces by September 2077. That's billions of caps in revenue. But there was a problem, a big problem, one that threatened to destroy everything. Peace talks. The United States and China had been at war for over a decade. The Sino-American War, they called it. Resources were running out. Oil was gone. Uranium was scarce. The world was bleeding dry, and everyone knew it. But in the summer of 2077, something unexpected happened. Diplomats started talking. Ambassadors started meeting. There were rumors, quiet rumors, that a treaty might be possible, that the war might end without nuclear fire. For most people, that would have been good news. For Vault-Tec, it was a death sentence. Think about it. If the war ended peacefully, what happened to all those people who'd bought vault spaces? They'd want refunds. They'd want their money back. And Vault-Tec couldn't give it to them because they'd already spent it. Spent it on construction, on experiments, on bribing government officials, on building an empire that only made sense if the world was going to end. Peace would expose them as the con artists they were. Peace would bankrupt them. Peace would mean investigations, lawsuits, prison time for everyone involved. Barbara Howard laid this out very clearly in the meeting. I'm paraphrasing here, but the gist was simple. Vault-Tec had a fiduciary responsibility to its investors. They had a duty to ensure profitability, and the only way to ensure profitability was to ensure catastrophe. She didn't dance around it. She didn't use euphemisms. She said exactly what she meant, in words that left no room for misunderstanding. Frederick Sinclair objected. Not on moral grounds, you understand. He objected because he thought it was too risky, too likely to fail, too many variables. How do you start a nuclear war without being caught? How do you make it look natural? How do you ensure that China takes the blame? These were practical concerns from a practical man. He wasn't horrified by the idea. He just wanted to know if it would work. Robert House was more calculating. He ran probability matrices in real time, his brilliant mind processing scenarios faster than anyone else in the room. He pointed out that if Vault-Tec dropped the first bomb, there would need to be careful timing. The retaliation would be swift, automatic. Protocols would kick in within minutes. The entire sequence needed to look like a legitimate first strike from China, or else the narrative would fall apart afterward. The survivors would need to believe the lie, or the whole plan would unravel. That's when Barbara Howard said the words that sealed humanity's fate. The words I read in those archived files. The words that haunt me every time I close what's left of my eyes. She said Vault-Tec would guarantee results by dropping the bombs themselves. She said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like she was discussing quarterly earnings or supply chain logistics. And then she smiled. I wasn't there to see it, but I know she smiled because that's what monsters do when they're winning. The room went quiet. The meeting minutes note a pause lasting 43 seconds. 43 seconds of silence, while the richest, most powerful people in America absorbed what they'd just heard. 43 seconds to decide if they were willing to murder a planet for profit. Nobody said no. Oh, there were questions, lots of questions, technical questions, logistical questions, questions about blast radius and fallout patterns and survival rates. But nobody asked the one question that mattered. Nobody asked if they should do it. That question never came up. It wasn't even considered. The morality had already been decided. The only thing left was implementation. Bud Askins talked about time. He was obsessed with time. He called it the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. His theory was simple. If Vault-Tec controlled who survived and who died, if they controlled the conditions of survival and the timeline of emergence, then they controlled the future. Everyone who opposed them would be dead. Everyone who questioned them would be ashes. The vaults would outlast their enemies by sheer endurance, and when the dust settled, literally and figuratively, Vault-Tec would be the only game in town, a monopoly on human civilization, a corporation that owned the species. He wasn't wrong. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, the plan was set. Each corporation would get control of specific vaults to run their own experiments. West-Tec would test the forced evolutionary virus. Big MT would explore brain extraction and consciousness transfer. Robco would develop advanced AI and robotics. Each vault would be a laboratory, each population a test subject. And when the war was over, when the surface was clean, they would emerge and compare notes and see whose vision of humanity had worked best. They called it competition. They called it the free market. They called it the perfect conditions for human advancement. I call it what it was: the largest human experiment ever conceived, sold to mass murderers as a business opportunity. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. The thing that proves beyond any doubt that they meant every word of it. Mr. House was at that meeting. Robert House, the genius, the man who could calculate the future. And 3 weeks after that meeting, Mr. House placed an order for a platinum chip, a specialized data chip that would be manufactured on October 22nd, 2077, and delivered to him on October 23rd, 2077. The very next day, he knew. He knew the exact date. He'd calculated it down to the hour. In fact, he was almost perfect. His predictions were off by only 20 hours. He thought the bombs would fall in the afternoon. They fell in the morning. 20 hours. That's how precise his calculations were, how much information he'd been given. How does someone predict a nuclear war to within 20 hours unless they know when it's scheduled to happen? That platinum chip, by the way, contained the operating system upgrades for his Securitron army and the laser defense grid he'd installed above Las Vegas. He was preparing to save his city. He was preparing to watch the world burn and keep his little corner safe. And he almost succeeded. 68 of the 77 missiles aimed at Las Vegas were destroyed by his defenses. The city survived, damaged, but intact. Mr. House survived, his body preserved in a life support chamber that would keep him alive for centuries. He knew because he was in that room. He knew because they told him. And he used that knowledge to save himself while doing nothing to warn anyone else. That's not a coincidence. That's not luck. That's proof. But maybe you're thinking I'm wrong. Maybe you're thinking this is just conspiracy theory, just the ramblings of a dying ghoul who's losing his grip on reality. Maybe you think China really did strike first, that Vault-Tec just got lucky with their timing. Let me show you why that doesn't work. Let me show you the timeline, the evidence, the pattern that only makes sense if Vault-Tec was in control from the beginning. Vault-Tec's stock prices skyrocketed after the Battle of Anchorage in January 2077. That was the last major engagement of the Sino-American War. The United States won, pushed China out of Alaska, secured the last oil reserves on the continent. It should have been the beginning of the end for Vault-Tec. If the war was winding down, if America was winning, why would anyone need vaults? But their stock didn't fall. It soared. Someone with insider information was buying heavily, betting that the war was far from over. In March 2077, cold fusion technology was successfully demonstrated by a scientist named Lee Moldava. I found her research notes in the archives. True cold fusion, unlimited clean energy, the technology that could have ended the resource wars immediately. Do you know what happened to her research? Vault-Tec bought it. All of it. Every patent, every prototype, every scrap of data. And then they buried it. They paid her off, classified everything above top secret, and made sure that technology would never see production. Why would they do that unless they wanted the energy crisis to continue? Unless they needed the fear and desperation that scarcity creates? In July 2077, Vault-Tec started something called the Vault Sellers Survival Guide Training Program. Audio recordings, instructional materials for their sales team. But here's the strange part. The training program emphasized post-war scenarios, how to approach survivors, how to negotiate with desperate people, how to establish authority in chaotic conditions. Why would you train your sales team for after the apocalypse unless you knew for certain the apocalypse was coming? August 2077. Vault-Tec executives started disappearing. Not all at once. Not obviously. But if you track the data, if you follow the personnel records, you see a pattern. Senior management taking extended leave. Family members relocating to undisclosed locations. Assets being moved into protected accounts. They were preparing, they were getting ready, and they were doing it months in advance. September 15th, 2077. The meeting I told you about. The meeting where they said it out loud, where they made it official. October 22nd, 2077. Mr. House's platinum chip is completed, ready for delivery the next day. October 23rd, 2077. 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The bombs fall. Do you see it now? Do you see the pattern? This wasn't chaos. This wasn't the fog of war or miscommunication or escalation spiraling out of control. This was scheduled. This was planned. This was executed with corporate precision by people who thought of mass murder as a deliverable on a project timeline. And here's the part that makes me want to scream until my throat tears open. Here's the part that proves they thought they'd gotten away with it. After the war, after the dust settled, after 200 years of ghoulification and mutation and suffering, Vault-Tec executives were still alive, still in control, still running their experiments. Bud Askins survived as a brain on a Roomba in Vault 31, managing his breeding program for perfect corporate managers. Vault 31 was full of cryogenically frozen Vault-Tec executives, waking up every few years to serve as overseers for Vaults 32 and 33. Hank McClain, one of Bud's buds, was still implementing Vault-Tec policy in the year 2296. More than 2 centuries after the bombs, and Vault-Tec was still running the show. They won. They actually won. They destroyed the world and came out on top. But it gets worse. Oh God, it gets so much worse. Because Vault-Tec didn't just drop the bombs in 2077, they kept dropping them. In 2277, Hank McClain authorized a nuclear strike on Shady Sands, the capital of the new California Republic. And now, entire city, tens of thousands of people, erased in atomic fire. Why? Because Shady Sands was succeeding. Because people were building something that didn't depend on Vault-Tec. Because democracy and cooperation and actual civilization were emerging from the wasteland. And Vault-Tec couldn't allow that. They didn't just end the world once, they're still ending it. Every time humanity tries to rebuild, every time communities start to thrive, Vault-Tec strikes them down. They have nuclear weapons hidden in undisclosed locations. They have overseers embedded in functioning societies. They have agents working to sabotage any recovery that doesn't serve their interests. The Great War never ended. It just got slower, more targeted, more cruel. I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to carry this truth forward into whatever comes next. The history books say China started the war. The survivors believe it. The factions fight over the scraps of the old world without understanding who really killed it. But now you know. Now you understand. Vault-Tec murdered the world. And they're proud of it. You need to understand how they did it. The mechanics matter. Because this wasn't just about pushing a button. This was about creating a situation where pushing that button would trigger the exact sequence they needed. They had to make it look like China. They had to ensure retaliation. They had to guarantee that nobody would ever trace it back to them. Let me show you how deep this goes. In 2077, Vault-Tec had something called the Vault Demonstration Project. They called it PAX for short. Peace through superior firepower. The public never heard about it. The government barely knew it existed. But I found the contracts, the purchase orders, the technical specifications. Vault-Tec had access to nuclear weapons. Not defensive systems, not Vault technology. Actual strategic nuclear warheads. They claimed it was for testing Vault resilience. They claimed they needed to understand blast effects, radiation dispersal, structural integrity under extreme conditions. The military signed off on it because Vault-Tec had friends in very high places. Friends who would later turn out to be the Enclave, the shadow government that thought they were running the show. But here's the beautiful irony. The Enclave thought they were using Vault-Tec. They thought they were the puppet masters. They didn't realize Vault-Tec had cut their strings and started dancing on their own. The PAX demonstration happened in June 2077, remote location in Nevada, far from any settlement. Vault-Tec invited military observers, government officials, corporate partners. They detonated a 15-kiloton tactical nuclear device to demonstrate their vault door's resistance to direct blast effects. The door held. Everyone was impressed. Contracts were renewed. Funding was approved. Nobody asked the obvious question. Why does a construction company need the capability to detonate nuclear weapons? But it wasn't just capability. It was willingness. They proved they were willing to use nuclear devices. They proved they had the technical expertise. They proved they could handle the weapons without triggering automatic defense systems or alerting international observers. And most importantly, they proved they could make it look routine, official, sanctioned. That demonstration wasn't about testing vault doors. It was a rehearsal, a proof of concept, a way of normalizing their access to world-ending weapons. And nobody stopped them because stopping Vault-Tec would have meant admitting that America had outsourced its survival to a corporation that couldn't be trusted. That would have caused panic. That would have undermined confidence. That would have been bad for business. So they let Vault-Tec keep their toys. Now let's talk about money, because that's what this was really about. Not ideology. Not politics. Not even power, though power was definitely part of it. This was about money, about quarterly earnings and shareholder value and profit margins. About a corporation that had built an empire on fear and couldn't afford for that fear to disappear. By September 2077, Vault-Tec had revenue projections showing catastrophic losses if peace broke out. I'm talking bankruptcy within 18 months, complete collapse within 3 years. They'd leveraged themselves to an insane degree. They'd borrowed against future Vault sales. They'd promised returns they couldn't possibly deliver without a nuclear war. They'd built bunkers that cost billions and would be worthless if nobody needed them. Their entire business model depended on the apocalypse happening. Let me put it in perspective. Vault-Tec was valued at approximately $1 trillion. That's a 1 followed by 12 zeros. They were the largest corporation in human history. They owned pieces of every major industry. Defense contractors, energy companies, food production, water purification, entertainment. They'd bought their way into everything. And all of it, every single cap of that $1 trillion valuation, was based on one assumption. The world was going to end, and Vault-Tec would save it. If peace negotiations succeeded, that assumption failed. If the war ended diplomatically, the company collapsed. And when Vault-Tec collapsed, it would take down every corporation that had invested in it, every bank that had loaned to it, every pension fund that held its stock. The economic devastation would be unprecedented. Millions would lose their life savings. The government would have to step in with bailouts they couldn't afford. The entire American economy would crater. Or, alternative plan, drop the bombs and guarantee your investment. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. The financial incentive was so overwhelming, it's almost surprising they hesitated as long as they did. Almost. Because there was one more piece they needed to put in place. One more element that would make the whole plan work. They needed to ensure that when they launched, China would launch back. They needed mutual assured destruction. They needed global annihilation. Because if only America got hit, if China stayed intact, then China would inherit the Earth and Vault-Tec's vaults would be worthless. They needed both sides to burn. So how do you make China launch their missiles? You make them think America launched first. Vault-Tec had deep connections in the intelligence community. Some of those connections were through the Enclave. Some were through corporate espionage networks that had been operating since the 2050s. Some were through simple bribery of low-level analysts who had access to classified systems. It doesn't matter how they did it. What matters is that they could inject false data into early warning systems. They could create the appearance of incoming missiles. They could trigger automatic response protocols. Here's what I think happened on October 23rd, 2077. I can't prove all of it, but the pieces fit too well to be coincidence. 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. Vault-Tec detonates a nuclear device over or near a strategic target in the United States. Maybe it was actually launched from Chinese-controlled territory. Maybe they'd smuggled a warhead there months earlier. Maybe they'd compromised a Chinese missile base. Maybe they used a submarine they'd bought through shell companies. The how doesn't matter as much as the result. American defense systems detect a nuclear detonation. It looks like a Chinese first strike. Automatic protocols engage. The president has 6 minutes to decide. But the president is missing. He'd been evacuated earlier that morning to an undisclosed location. Some people say he was already on his way to the Enclave's oil rig. Some say he was never president at all, just a figurehead while the Enclave ran everything. Either way, he wasn't there to stop what happened next. The military launches retaliatory strikes. Hundreds of missiles, thousands of warheads, targeting Chinese cities, military bases, industrial centers, everything they'd been planning for decades. Everything the doctrine called for. The United States empties its arsenal in 40 minutes, 9:53 a.m. Eastern Time. 6 minutes after the first detonation, Chinese early warning systems detect American launches. Multiple launches, from land-based silos, submarine platforms, strategic bombers. They're not detecting Vault-Tec's bomb anymore. They're detecting America's response to Vault-Tec's bomb. And it looks like the Americans struck first. It looks like the nightmare scenario they'd been preparing for. It looks like they have 15 minutes before their civilization ends. China launches everything. Every missile they have. Every warhead they can fire. Targeting American cities, military installations, industrial infrastructure. They're not trying to win anymore. They're trying to ensure mutual destruction. If they're going to die, America dies with them. 10:03 a.m. Eastern Time. The first Chinese missiles impact American soil. Real Chinese missiles this time. Not Vault-Tec false flags. Actual retaliation. The western seaboard erupts in nuclear fire. Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. All hit within minutes. The Midwest follows. Then the East Coast. New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., though most of the government had already evacuated. By 1 p.m. Eastern Time, it was over. Both nations destroyed. 4 hours of launches. 4 hours of impacts. 4 hours to end 200 years of human progress. The resource wars had been brutal. The Sino-American War had been devastating. But this was extinction level. This was the world eating itself alive. And Vault-Tec executives watched it happen from the safety of their bunkers, checking off items on a project timeline. The shadow government connection runs deeper than most people realize. The Enclave thought they were in charge. They thought they'd orchestrated everything. They thought Vault-Tec was their tool, their instrument for conducting social experiments and ensuring their own survival. But the evidence suggests something different, something worse. The Enclave was founded in the 2050s as a continuity of government program. High-ranking military officials, political leaders, corporate executives. The idea was that if nuclear war happened, these people would survive and rebuild America according to their vision. They built bunkers. They stockpiled supplies. They created communication networks. They planned for decades. And when they needed someone to build survival shelters for the rest of the population, shelters they could monitor and control and experiment on, they contracted Vault-Tec. That's the official story. That's what the Enclave believed. But I think the relationship was more complicated. Vault-Tec was already massive by the time the Enclave approached them. Already powerful, already influential. They didn't need the Enclave's money or authority. What they needed was cover, legitimacy, a way to build their empire without anyone asking too many questions. So they let the Enclave think they were in charge. They let the Enclave believe they were running the show. They built the vaults according to Enclave specifications. They conducted the experiments the Enclave wanted. They played along, right up until they didn't need to anymore. I found evidence of this in the financial records. Money flowing in strange directions. Payments to Enclave officials that looked like bribes. Vault-Tec executives meeting with Enclave leadership and then Enclave policy, mysteriously changing to favor Vault-Tec interests. By 2077, it was impossible to tell where the Enclave ended and Vault-Tec began. They'd merged in all the ways that mattered. The shadow government and the corporation had become the same entity. But here's the crucial detail. When the bombs fell, Enclave members survived. Lots of them. They'd been evacuated to secure locations. The oil rig off the California coast. The congressional bunker at the White Spring Resort. Raven Rock. Adams Air Force Base. Safe locations scattered across America. They survived just fine, but they didn't know the bombs were coming. Not the exact timing. Not the way Vault-Tec knew. The president was missing that morning. Gone. Evacuated without explanation. Some Enclave officials made it to safety. Many didn't. The ones who survived were the ones Vault-Tec wanted to survive. The ones who were useful. The ones who would be manageable in the post-war world. The rest were left behind. expendable, acceptable losses. Vault-Tec had infiltrated the Enclave so thoroughly that they'd become the Enclave. And when the time came, they pulled the trigger without asking permission. The shadow government found out the world was ending the same way everyone else did. By watching the mushroom clouds rise. That's real power, not military force, not political authority. The power to decide who lives and who dies without anyone realizing you're the one making the decision. That's what Vault-Tec achieved. They became the hidden hand controlling humanity's fate, and Mr. House knew. He had to have known. Because he made preparations that only make sense if you know exactly when and how the end is coming. The platinum chip wasn't the only thing. He fortified the Lucky 38 casino. He installed a life support system that could keep him alive for centuries. He built a laser defense grid powerful enough to shoot down most of the missiles targeting Las Vegas. He recruited tribes and positioned assets and created backup plans for his backup. Plans? You don't do all that on a hunch. You don't make those preparations based on probability models alone. You do it because you were in the meeting. You do it because you heard the plan. You do it because you knew the date, and he was 20 hours off. 20 hours. His platinum chip was supposed to arrive the afternoon of October 23rd. He'd calculated the bombs would fall around 8 p.m. Eastern Time. He'd positioned everything for that timeline. But Vault-Tec moved it up, launched in the morning instead. Maybe they had a reason. Maybe the timeline shifted. Maybe they just wanted to catch people off guard. Make sure nobody had time to react or interfere or warn anyone. Whatever the reason, Mr. House's calculations were wrong by less than a day. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. That's not prediction. That's inside information. And what did Mr. House do with that information? Did he warn anyone? Did he try to stop it? Did he evacuate civilians or alert the military or attempt to prevent genocide? No, he saved himself. He saved his city. He let the rest of the world burn. Because in the end, he was just another corporate executive at that table. Just another man who valued profit over people. Just another monster in a suit. I wonder if Cooper Howard ever found out what his wife really did. I wonder if he learned, in those first terrible days after the bombs fell, that Barbara had engineered it all. That she'd condemned their daughter to radiation and horror. That she'd killed 7 billion people for a quarterly earnings report. I wonder if that's what turned him into what he became. The ghoul, the monster, the killer wandering the wasteland with nothing left to lose and 2 centuries of rage eating him alive. I hope he found out. I hope he knows. I hope it destroys him every single day, because he was the face of Vault-Tec. He was the celebrity spokesman. He was the friendly cowboy telling everyone that vaults were safe, that Vault-Tec cared, that the future was bright. He sold the lie even if he didn't know it was a lie. And 7 billion people believed him. But Barbara knew. Barbara stood in that conference room and said the words that ended the world. By dropping the bombs ourselves. 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words to commit omnicide. 5 words to murder a planet. 5 words that proved everything the conspiracy theorists had been saying was actually too optimistic. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. She said it so calmly. The meeting minutes don't record any hesitation. No moral crisis, no doubt. Just a practical solution to a business problem. Profits were threatened. Peace was breaking out. The only logical response was to start a nuclear war. It made perfect corporate sense. That's what haunts me most. Not that it happened. Not that they did it, but that it made sense to them. That a room full of the smartest, most educated, most successful people in human history looked at mass murder and saw sound business strategy. They weren't crazy. They weren't irrational. They were following the incentives. They were maximizing shareholder value. They were doing exactly what the system had trained them to do. The system worked perfectly. It just worked for them, not for us. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. Vault-Tec's executive survival rate proves everything. After the Great War, after 200 years, after the rise and fall of countless wasteland factions, Vault-Tec executives are still alive, still in power, still running their experiments. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen unless you knew exactly when and where the bombs would fall, unless you made sure you were somewhere safe when you pressed the button. Bud Askins in Vault 31, Hank McLean in Vault 33, Betty Pearson, Steph, dozens more frozen in cryopods, waiting their turn to wake up and manage the breeding program. All of them survived. All of them were in the right place at the right time. All of them continue Vault-Tec's mission like the war happened yesterday instead of 2 centuries ago. Meanwhile, regular people died. Children died. People who trusted Vault-Tec, who bought vault space, who believed the promises. Most vaults weren't even designed to save anyone. They were experiments, torture chambers dressed up as safety. Control vaults were the minority. Most people who made it into vaults found themselves subjected to psychological horror, biological experiments, social engineering designed to break them. The vaults weren't shelters. They were laboratories. And the people inside were rats. But the executives lived. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's proof of foreknowledge. That's proof of guilt. I'm running out of time now. I can feel the feral madness closer. It comes in waves. Moments where I forget why I'm telling you this. Moments where all I feel is hunger. Moments where the rage almost wins. But not yet. Not quite yet. I have one more thing to show you. One more piece of evidence that seals it beyond any possible doubt. The cold fusion suppression. Lee Moldova proved cold fusion worked in March 2077. Unlimited clean energy. The solution to every resource shortage. The technology that would have ended the resource wars immediately. No more fighting over oil. No more uranium scarcity. No more reason for the Sino-American War to continue. Peace would have been inevitable. Prosperity would have followed. The world would have healed. Vault-Tec bought her research and buried it. They paid her off. They classified everything. They made sure nobody would ever benefit from what she'd discovered. And they did it because cold fusion would have eliminated the need for vaults, would have made Vault-Tec irrelevant, would have saved the world but cost them their profits. So they chose profits. They chose their trillion-dollar valuation over human survival. They chose corporate success over preventing nuclear war. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about what they were capable of. They had the power to save the world, and they chose destruction instead. They had the choice, and they made it deliberately. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't negligence. This was calculated evil, and it worked. 200 years later, Vault-Tec still controls the wasteland. Their experiments continue. Their executives wake from cryo and take their positions as overseers. Their vision of managed humanity unfolds exactly as planned. They dropped the bombs, and they inherited the Earth. I need you to carry this forward. I need you to tell others. I need this to spread until everyone knows what really happened, until the name Vault-Tec becomes synonymous with genocide, until the truth can't be buried anymore, until someone does something about the executives, still running around out there, still implementing their plans, still treating humanity as corporate assets. The Great War wasn't a war, it was a corporate strategy. And the corporation won. They're still out there. That's what keeps me coherent, even as the radiation eats my brain. The knowledge that Vault-Tec executives are still walking around, still breathing, still implementing plans they made before the world died. They're not ghosts. They're not legends. They're real, tangible threats frozen in cryopods, or hiding behind overseer desks, or controlling settlements from the shadows. And they need to be stopped. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me finish showing you the proof. Let me complete the testimony before the madness takes over completely. Because there are still pieces you need to see. Still connections you need to understand. The full scope of what they did, what they're still doing, what they plan to do next. The timeline tells the story better than any confession could. Let me walk you through it one more time. Not just the dates, but what they mean. What they reveal about intent and planning and premeditation. This wasn't a snap decision. This wasn't panic or fear or miscalculation. This was years in the making. 53. Vault-Tec wins the government contract for Project Safehouse. The official story is that they're building bunkers to save American citizens in case of nuclear war. The real story is that they're building laboratories to experiment on those citizens. But even in 2053, I don't think they'd fully committed to dropping the bombs themselves. Not yet. That would come later, as the financial incentives became impossible to ignore. 63. The resource wars begin. Nations fighting over oil, uranium, rare minerals. Everything running out, everything scarce. Vault-Tec's stock prices start to climb. Fear is good for business. Scarcity is profitable. They're not causing it yet, but they're definitely benefiting from it. 266. The Sino-American War officially begins. China invades Alaska for its oil reserves. The United States responds with military force. The conflict everyone knew was coming finally arrives. Vault-Tec vault sales explode. They can't build bunkers fast enough. They're making billions. This is their golden age. 67. The T-45 power armor is deployed. Bud Askins was part of the team that rolled it out. He knew the armor had design flaws. He knew American soldiers were dying because the armor failed. He pushed it out anyway because meeting deadlines was more important than soldier safety. This is the same man who would later orchestrate Bud's Buds. The same man who saw human life as a management problem. He was already a monster. The bombs just gave him permission to be honest about it. 76. The Battle of Anchorage. The United States wins decisively, pushes China out of Alaska, secures the oil reserves. This should have been the beginning of American victory. This should have been the moment when Vault-Tec's stock crashed because peace was possible. Instead, their stock soared. Why? Because someone with inside information knew the war wasn't really over, knew it couldn't be over, knew the worst was yet to come. January 2077, Vault-Tec is voted the company with the brightest future in America. The irony is staggering. The company planning to end the world is celebrated as the future. The corporation, already plotting genocide, receives awards for innovation, and nobody sees it. Nobody questions it. Everyone believes the lie. March 2077. Lee Moldova demonstrates working cold fusion, the technology that would save everything. Vault-Tec immediately moves to suppress it. They can't let peace break out, can't let the energy crisis be solved, can't let their business model collapse. So they bury the solution to humanity's problems. They choose profit over survival. This is the moment, I think, when they fully committed, when they looked at cold fusion and realized they had to act fast or lose everything. This is when dropping the bombs became inevitable. June 2077. The PAX demonstration. Vault-Tec detonates a nuclear device in Nevada, proves they have the capability, proves they have the weapons, proves they can do it without raising alarms. This wasn't a test. This was a rehearsal. This was them making sure they could actually do what they were planning. July 2077. The Vault Sellers Survival Guide training program begins, teaching salespeople how to negotiate with survivors, how to establish authority after the apocalypse, how to manage desperate people. You don't create that training unless you know the apocalypse is scheduled. August 2077. Vault-Tec executives start disappearing. Family members relocate. Assets are moved. They're getting into position, getting safe, getting ready. This is 2 months before the bombs. 2 months of preparation. 2 months of making sure they'd survive what they were about to do. September 15th, 2077. The meeting. The one where Barbara Howard says the words. Where they make it official. Where 14 corporations agree to murder the world. This is 40 days before October 23rd. 40 days to finalize plans. 40 days to position assets. 40 days to make sure nothing goes wrong. October 22nd, 2077. Mr. House's platinum chip is completed. 1 day before the bombs. 1 day before he needs it. The timing is impossible to explain any other way. He knew. He'd always known. October 23rd, 2077, 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The first bomb falls. The world ends. Vault-Tec executives watch from safety. Everything goes according to plan. Almost. A few things go wrong. A few people are caught in the open who should have been safe. Cooper Howard's daughter is at a birthday party instead of in a vault. Maybe Barbara couldn't get her to safety without raising suspicions. Maybe the timeline moved up faster than expected. Maybe Vault-Tec didn't care if a few of their own families burned as long as the plan succeeded. Whatever the reason, the bombs fall and 7 billion people die and Vault-Tec survives. That's the timeline. That's the evidence. Every piece fits together. Every date makes sense if and only if Vault-Tec planned it. There's no other explanation that accounts for all the facts. China didn't know when the bombs would fall. The Enclave didn't know the exact timing. The US military didn't know. But Vault-Tec knew. Mr. House knew. The corporations at that meeting knew. They knew because they scheduled it. They knew because they were going to cause it. And the proof keeps piling up even after the bombs fell. The pattern continues. The same corporate logic. The same willingness to use nuclear weapons as a management tool. Because Vault-Tec didn't stop with the Great War. They're still dropping bombs. Still ending worlds. Still treating nuclear annihilation as just another business strategy. Shady Sands, 2277. 200 years after the Great War, the new California Republic had built something real, a functioning democracy, trade networks, rule of law, education, healthcare. They were proving that humanity could rebuild, could recover, could create civilization from the ashes. They had 30,000 citizens. They were thriving. They were hope incarnate. Hank McClain dropped a nuclear bomb on them. Not China. Not raiders. Not some ancient automated defense system. A Vault-Tec overseer, one of Bud's buds, one of the pre-war executives who'd been frozen and woken up and put in charge, made the decision to end 30,000 lives. And he did it for the same reason Barbara Howard dropped the bombs in 2077. Because those lives threatened Vault-Tec's control. Because Shady Sands was succeeding without vaults. Because people were choosing democracy over corporate management. Because the NCR was building the future Vault-Tec wanted to own. So they destroyed it. Simple as that. They saw something they couldn't control and they erased it. They still had the weapons. They still had the willingness to use them. They still believed that nuclear fire was an acceptable solution to business problems. Nothing had changed. The company that ended the world in 2077 was still ending worlds in 2277. Still treating mass murder as policy. Still operating according to the same corporate logic that values profits over people. They'd learned nothing, felt no remorse, saw no reason to stop, because it worked. It keeps working. Every time someone builds something without Vault-Tec's permission, they destroy it. Every time a settlement grows too independent, too successful, too free, Vault-Tec intervenes, sometimes with bombs, sometimes with sabotage, sometimes just by waking up another frozen executive and sending them to infiltrate and corrupt from within. But they always intervene. They always maintain control. They always win. That's what you're up against. That's what we're all up against. Not a historical tragedy. Not a past event that's done and finished. An ongoing atrocity. A continuing crime. A corporation that ended the world and is still running it from the shadows. They own the vaults. They control the overseers. They have nuclear weapons stashed in hidden locations. They have executives frozen and waiting. They have plans that stretch centuries into the future. They're patient. They're organized. They're utterly ruthless. And they're not going to stop unless someone stops them. The evidence is overwhelming. The timeline is damning. The pattern is undeniable. Vault-Tec dropped the bombs in 2077. Vault-Tec dropped the bombs in 2277. Vault-Tec will drop more bombs whenever their control is threatened. This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This is documented fact. This is proven history. This is the truth that everyone needs to know. But here's what terrifies me even more than what they've done. Here's what keeps me screaming inside, even as my mind fragments. They're still planning. Still preparing. Still conducting their experiments. Because to them, the Great War wasn't a tragedy. It was the beginning. It was the moment their real work could start. The moment they could rebuild humanity, according to their specifications. The moment they could create the perfect corporate utopia where everyone is managed and controlled and optimized for Vault-Tec's benefit. That's what the Vault experiments were about. Not just cruelty for cruelty's sake. Not just scientists being evil because they could. Every Vault was testing a different hypothesis, a different social structure, a different way of controlling human populations. Some Vaults tested autocracy, some tested democracy, some tested isolation, some tested crowding, some tested violence, some tested cooperation. Every imaginable variable was being tested somewhere in some Vault on some population that had no idea they were guinea pigs. And Vault-Tec was taking notes, recording data, comparing results, learning which methods worked best for controlling people, learning which social structures were most stable, learning how to break human beings and rebuild them into perfect corporate citizens. That was the point. That was always the point. The experiments weren't random sadism. They were research. They were development. They were Vault-Tec learning how to rule humanity forever. And some of the experiments worked. Some of the vaults produced exactly what Vault-Tec wanted: compliant populations, stable hierarchies, people who accepted authority without question, people who believed the lies they were told, people who saw Vault-Tec as saviors instead of murderers. Those vaults were successes. Those populations were valuable. Those people would be the foundation of Vault-Tec's new world. The other vaults, the ones that failed, the ones where people rebelled or went insane or killed each other, those were learning experiences, data points showing what not to do, mistakes to avoid next time. Vault-Tec didn't mourn those failures. They just adjusted the variables and tried again somewhere else with someone else, because there were always more vaults, always more people, always more chances to get it right. That's the scope of their ambition. They're not trying to rebuild America. They're trying to build something new, something that never existed before. A world where corporations openly own everything and everyone, where human beings are resources to be managed, where democracy and freedom and choice are bugs to be eliminated from the system, where Vault-Tec runs everything because they're the only ones left who know how, and they're winning. After 200 years, they're still winning. They control more than anyone realizes. They have overseers in settlements that think they're independent. They have agents in factions that think they're fighting Vault-Tec. They have vaults that haven't even opened yet, frozen executives waiting for the right moment to emerge. They've been playing a 2-century-long game, and they're patient enough to wait another 2 centuries if that's what it takes. But I'm telling you this so you can fight back, so you can resist, so you can spread the truth until enough people know that Vault-Tec can't hide anymore. Because that's their weakness, secrecy. If everyone knew what they'd done, if everyone understood that Vault-Tec dropped the bombs, if everyone realized the company that claims to protect humanity actually destroyed it, then maybe someone would do something about it. The evidence is here. Hidden in sub-level 9 of Vault-Tec Tower, the servers are still running. The data is still intact. The meeting minutes are still stored. The financial records are still accessible. Everything you need to prove what I'm telling you is true. Everything you need to show the world what really happened. It's all here. You just have to find it. You just have to retrieve it before Vault-Tec realizes it survived. I would have taken it with me, would have carried it to every settlement and broadcast it to every radio station and made sure everyone heard the truth. But I'm out of time. The feral madness is too close now. I can barely remember why I'm recording this. Can barely hold on to coherent thoughts. Soon I'll be nothing but hunger and rage. Soon I'll be another ghoul shambling through the ruins. No different from the thousands of others. No memory, no purpose, no humanity left. But before that happens, I needed to tell someone. Needed to make sure the information survived even if I don't. Needed to create a record that couldn't be erased or denied. This testimony, these facts, this proof, it's all here, it's all true, and it's all yours now. Do something with it, please. Don't let them keep getting away with it. Don't let them keep dropping bombs and calling it management. Don't let them own the future the way they owned the past. Vault-Tec murdered the world. 7 billion people dead because a corporation valued quarterly earnings over human life. And they're still in power, still in control, still planning the next atrocity. That's the truth. That's what happened. That's what's still happening. And somebody needs to stop them before they finish what they started. I can hear something outside. Footsteps maybe. Or maybe just the wind through the ruins. Hard to tell anymore. Hard to trust my senses. Everything is starting to blur together. But I've said what I needed to say. I've given you the evidence. I've shown you the proof. The rest is up to you. Find the servers. Find the files. Find the truth buried in sub-level 9. And when you do, when you see it for yourself, when you read Barbara Howard's words in the meeting minutes, when you trace the money and the timeline and the pattern, remember me. Remember that someone died to preserve this information. Remember that the truth matters. Remember that Vault-Tec must answer for what they've done. The world ended on October 23rd, 2077. But it didn't have to. It wasn't inevitable. It wasn't China. It wasn't war or politics, or the natural progression of history. It was a choice, a corporate decision, a calculated act of genocide committed for profit. And the people who made that choice are still alive, still watching, still planning, still believing they have the right to manage humanity like a resource. They don't. They never did. And if enough people learn the truth, maybe we can finally hold them accountable. Maybe we can finally make them pay. Maybe we can finally stop them from dropping the next bomb on the next settlement that dares to build something without their permission. That's my confession. That's my testimony. That's the truth about who really destroyed the world. Vault-Tec dropped the bombs. Not China, not America, not war or accident or miscommunication. Vault-Tec, the corporation that promised to save us, murdered us instead. And they're still out there, still dropping bombs, still ending worlds, still treating human extinction as a business strategy. Don't forget. Don't forgive. Don't let them win. The madness is here now. I can feel it. The hunger, the rage, the moment when I stop being human and become something else. Something that screams and kills and doesn't remember why. But I've done what I needed to do. I've preserved the truth. I've left the evidence. I've created this record. Now it's up to you. Stop them. Stop. Vault-Tec, stop them before they drop the last bomb. Before they finish murdering humanity. Before they... Recording ends with static and the distant sound of inhuman screaming.